All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Wapiti Wednesday for January 29th. So I was telling Jim before we got on here, I updated all my lighting and also added a ambiance backlight to kind of give a new effect. So, and the next Wapiti Wednesday Live Q&A is going to look completely different because I'm going to take my desk from this corner and shift it to that corner. So then over my shoulder, you guys will be looking at that wall. So we're going to move some things up and shake it
All
up. So,
right.
but tonight's topic, we're actually going to kind of expand off of the topic that we did a couple of weeks ago. Tonight, we're going to talk about winter elk habitat and strategies. And, this will be useful information for a few things. It'll just let you understand elk a little bit more, but also, too, for those of you that do have possibly a late season tag. And these type of things will apply. Colorado fourth season elk. There's some November rifle hunts, some December rifle hunts where there's some good amount of snow. So these habitats will be good to know. So just like you guys have gotten accustomed to, we have a handy dandy breakdown and talking point sheet again. So, all right. So, did anybody research about the elk blood vessels within their legs that help them stay warm?
Uh, didn't do it. Should have. I went to, but
Actually, what it is, so the way their arteries and veins work within their legs, so the arteries that are bringing blood from the heart, the warmed blood, actually travel very close to the veins that are returning the cold blood back to the heart. And by passing close by, it actually re-warms up that blood coming back to the heart. So that warmer blood that's coming out is warming up the colder blood coming back up the leg, and that's one of their adaptations for wintertime for keeping those legs warm. So now I kind of decided, that was kind of a fun topic, kind of a neat thing to talk about. So I want to dive into it a little bit better. And also, too, because current time of year that we're at right now, winter time. And I know we touched briefly, so we're going to dive into winter elk habitat. So the first thing is elevation and terrain selection. We kind of talked about this, last time. So some of these things will kind of be a repeat, like prefer southern facing slopes because it receives more direct sunlight. But also, too, elk typically will move lower in elevations as snow depth increases. So as the rut winds down, elk will kind of start gathering and getting ready for their migration routes. So the larger herd bulls are typically, separated from the herds. And now the line here, elk typically move to lower elevations as snow depth increases. They have to do that because easier access to food. So, but there are some very big dominant bulls that will stay up in the deep snow all winter long. So they just kind of, and there's some things we'll get into like down in movement patterns that we'll kind of touch on how they're able to stay up in that higher elevation. So, um, you know, so they prefer the southern facing slopes that were, more direct sunlight, but they also seek areas with dense timber for thermal cover and wind protection. So, because if you think about it, if they're on that south side that receives more sunlight and it actually has heavier timber for thermal cover. Because remember, warm air is lighter than cold air and it rises. And so if they're out in the open, there's nothing to keep that hot air trapped down, that warmer air trapped down. But if they're in denser timber, that canopy can actually hold that heat in on that southern exposure. So So southern exposure with more direct sunlight, thermal cover. So the combination of that more sunlight hitting that thermal cover will help kind of keep that in. They'll also look for thermal belts where temperature inversions create warmer zones. So this is just kind of the opposite of early season. Early season, they're looking for those cool, dark draws. Now in the wintertime, they're actually looking for these thermal belts. And a lot of times you'll find these in rock faces because, rocks attract the sun, it soaks up the temperature. And so they'll get in those type of thermal belt areas because with those rocks soaking in the sun, then it just radiates it back up. It's just like ever for us, if we're in a survival situation and if we can find a three-sided rock face and build a fire, that three-sided rock face is going to reflect that heat back up onto us, and it's going to actually help create a warmer area like that. So just like normal, they still focus on ridges and benches that collect less snow, especially if it's a southern facing bench or southern facing ridge. So they're going to find that area that has where they don't have to move very far because they want to conserve energy because a lot of their energy is just spent towards surviving. So key in on transition zones between timber and open areas. The open areas, a lot of times, especially on those southern facing slopes, is going to have less snow cover. It's going to be easier for them to get to food, but then they can retreat back into that dense timber thermal cover where the heat's kind of trapped from the sun, especially if you have that rocky outcropping also in there. So. All right, feed sources and nutrition. So primary winter food is dried grasses and forbs that stick up through the snow. There's not a whole lot of nutrition in the dried grasses, but there is enough that they can maintain. This is why, as that snow gets deeper and deeper, they move farther and farther down the mountain because the less amount of snow there is, they can paw through it easier and get to those dry grasses. That's why a lot of wintering grounds for elk is at lower elevations than where they typically are spring, summer, and fall. So, they'll also browse on woody plants like serviceberry, mountain mahogany, and tree bark. So they will actually use their teeth and strip the bark off of aspen trees and willow trees. So, which sounds interesting because it's like how the heck can elk eat bark? How can they eat twigs? But remember, elk have a four-chambered stomach. So, they just burp it back up and chew that cud and just work on it and just work through those four different those chambers. And always agricultural fields. That's why there's a lot of time. I know here in Idaho, we have depredation hunts that if it's a really hard winter and elk are just hammering agricultural fields, Fish and Game will issue depredation hunt tags where people basically work with the landowners. There's a lot of landowners that just don't like elk on their property because it just tears up their fields. They get into their hay barns, get into their haystacks, and it just creates a lot of ruckus, especially if these are cattle ranchers and that alfalfa and winter food is critical for their cows. So, okay, kind of go back to what we were talking about with the snow. They can paw down through 18 inches of snow. Starts getting deeper than that, it gets really, really tough for them. They also concentrate their feeding efforts during the warmer parts of the day, which is kind of different and opposite of, normal time of the year where, they do a lot of their feeding and activity at night is a good majority. This one's a little bit different. So, all right, movement patterns. So, wintertime and in snow is a much easier time to pattern elk because their patterns are a lot more predictable and established. Primarily because as the snow gets deeper, they create trails through the snow, and they stick to those trails, single file in the trails. You know, other parts of the year, they just kind of can spread out and wander because they're not fighting that snow. As soon as they get out of that trail network, it's a lot more work for them. Just like with us, you know, walking on a groomed trail versus if we get off the groomed trail into powder, how much work it is to get through. And especially, I mean, if you've ever tried to hike through waist deep or, you know, mid thigh deep snow, it's a lot of work. It takes a ton of energy. So same thing with them. You know, often bed near feeding areas to minimize that energy expenditure, like we talked about. So they're, you know, normal, nicer, fair weather. You know, they could travel 3, 4, 5, 6 miles between feeding and bedding. During the wintertime, that area is shrunk down a lot tighter, just because they've got to conserve the energy. They don't want to walk as far. They want to, you know, use that energy to keep themselves warm. So, all right, critical winter range features: protected draws and canyons that block harsh wind. Just kind of what I was talking to Larry about. Areas with varied topography, offering different options as conditions change, meaning they can you know, go up in elevation, down in elevation, go into the trees, come out into the open. You know, it has a lot of different options as the conditions change a little bit. So, and the most important thing is access to running water that doesn't freeze. So, you know, your stock ponds, your you know, little lakes, that kind of stuff, those freeze over. Um, you know, you see it all the time of elk falling through the ice, and it's just, you know, they're searching for water. So water is the key to life, and they know where it's at. They know where to go. That's why that lead cow. I mean, she's been to the wintering grounds. She knows where the good feed is. She knows where the good you know, water is. She knows where to get out of the wind. She knows that area, and by her leading the group year after year, then, you know, the next lead cow that steps up, she already has all that info already programmed in. So the other thing too is limited human disturbance, because they don't want to get bothered, because if they do get bothered and they have to get up and start running, that's again a lot of energy that they expend, and that could be the difference between surviving and non-surviving. So, all right, survival adaptations. So their metabolism actually slows down quite a bit during the winter months, which means they don't need as many calories as they do um, other times of the year. Cows, though, they still need a good amount of calories, because basically they're they're growing the next generation of elk during the winter. So by their metabolism slowing down, they don't burn through the nutrients as much, and that's how those cows can actually take. Because remember, they're eating dry grasses that don't have the nutrient complexity like it does at other times of the year, so they have to make the most of that. So they can lose 15 to 30% of their body weight, and this is where the old and the sick suffer. Same thing with, bulls that rutted really, really hard. Maybe they got in a fight, maybe they got injured. They weren't able to pack on, that body fat reserve like they really needed to. So that 15 to 30% of body weight loss can be absolutely huge. So again, they seek areas where they can maximize the solar gain, the warmth from the sun. Again, those rocky areas that are going to soak in that heat. So now they will also use each other's body for heat when bedded. So instead of, we kind of touched on that just a little bit couple of weeks ago. So instead of bedding down spread out, they're more compact when they bed down, because they're sharing that. But also too, it's not just sharing body heat, but it's also working as a wind block also. So they will become more nocturnal during periods of disturbance. That is actually something that will happen all year long. It's not just wintertime. So, all right, weather impact considerations. Wind direction greatly influences bedding location. Heavy snow can force dramatic elevation changes. They can go from high down to low really quick, and they do have a feel. Because remember, they're tapped into that barometric pressure. They know when a storm's coming. So there's a lot of times that they will start dropping elevation down because they know that snow's coming, and it's a lot easier to get down in elevation before that really gets bad. So that way they're ahead of it. Plus, if other rain, if other events, like rain or really cold temps that make crusted snow, freezing rain, all those things make movement really challenging and difficult on them. And again, that's why they shrink their travel areas down again. So, and then temperature fluctuations that can affect daily movement. Colder days, they're not going to move as much. Warmer days, they're actually going to take advantage of that. And maybe they'll branch out a little bit farther. So get some more feed sources, maybe hit something that, is a little bit farther out that they can feed on, saving that closer stuff for, harsher conditions. So wind direction and bedding strategy. Now, remember when we talked about during the summertime, how they will lay with the wind going, up their back to cool them. The winter, they will still do that, but it's kind of the opposite. So they always prefer to bed with the wind at their back, because what's kind of crazy is they can see in front of them during the winter, but the wind from the back, they can smell anything coming behind them. But also, too, their thick winter coat actually works better when wind hits it from behind, because that wind hitting it from behind will actually stand the hair up a little bit, which will then form air pockets in between the hairs, and that air actually acts as another layer of insulation. So, and reduces energy expenditure fighting the wind versus not fighting the wind. So, okay. All right. I kind of expanded on 7 here a little bit just because it was just one line when I first started researching this, and I wanted to dive into it just a little bit. So, specific bedding locations based on wind, and I wish Larry would have kind of stuck in on this because this might help him a little bit. So, if the wind is coming out of the north, and you guys are going to get this breakdown when I send the email out for the recovery or the replay posting. But this will help any of you that do have a late season rifle tag that does have weather, does have snow. You can refer back to this, because this is going to help you decide where you're going to hunt within your hunt area based off these different winds. So first off, northern wind direct scenarios. Wind is coming from the north. They're going to seek southern slopes with terrain breaks, because those terrain breaks, it could be little small cliffs, could be a real steep drop off to a bench, because the way the wind goes, the wind doesn't follow the contour exactly. So if you have a cliff and the wind's coming, the wind's going to still continue and fall. So you're going to have this little shelter down in this area. So the wind's kind of coming. You're going to have this little block right down here that is out of the wind, and that's just going to help them stay. Same thing with a ridge line. If you've ever been on a ridge line, as soon as you fall off that ridge line, there's a little period there where the wind doesn't hit, because that wind again rolls off that ridge and then down, so you have that break. So it doesn't necessarily have to just be a cliff. It can be a knife ridge, a finger ridge that has a sharp top that will do the same thing on that. They'll also get into timber patches as wind breaks, and they may move deeper into the canyons or draws to get down into areas that give them actually more of a shelter break from that wind. Okay, when the wind comes from the south, they're going to move around the mountain to north facing slopes, but still near the edge of timber. Now this is the time, because we know that on the north and northeastern side of the mountain in the timber, that's colder. Those are those cool dark areas they seek. Excuse me. But they're not actually going to go into the timber. They will be out in the open areas right on the edge of the timber. So they'll utilize bench systems below ridges just like they will on the southern areas, because again, that still gives that wind break that they can get out. And they're going to bed closer to feeding areas just because of that southern wind, and they don't want to move as far. And they may bed higher on slopes for a better advantage to be able to see anything that's coming after them. East and west wind patterns, they're going to look for corresponding terrain features that block crosswinds. So again, it's going to be topography features, it's going to be timber, it could be, a bunch of willows, jack pines, cedar, all different things in those clusters will give them the block from the crosswinds. They'll use finger ridges as natural wind breaks, just like they will the others. So depending on the wind, if the wind's coming from the east, they're going to be on the west side of the finger ridge. If the wind's coming from the west, they're going to be on the east side. So again, they'll bed tighter to timber edges because those edges can help block that crosswind. They won't be out in the open on those windy days. They may utilize small bowl features, or protective pockets. Sometimes in those small bowl features, you can get heavy timber within those, and they can get within that timber to get that thermal cover that we talked about, but also the advantage of that break over with that wind just coming right over the top of them, and they can just get right up tight on that edge in that thermal cover to stay a little bit warmer. All right, additional considerations: morning thermals rising versus midday falling. So there are times, and the one thing you will get into areas where that wind swirls in the bottom of some draws and canyons. That's why typically during the winter you won't find them in the bottom of deep draws. They'll be up off the bottom a little bit because those bottoms can get that swirling a little bit. They also have multiple escape routes usually available, so especially through the snow too, where they're walking through, picking those trails. As the snow piles up, they're already working on their trail system. And it's a lot of times it's not just they'll have their main route, but they'll also have alternate routes too that are their escape routes should they need to escape easily through those trails versus trying to go and run through the deeper snow. So distance to feed is relative to the wind direction. Thermal cover for availability, like we talked about, and then snow depth influence on bedding choices. They're gonna bed in shallower snow elevations than deeper snow. So, again, you're going to think about the mountain. Your northeastern facing side of the mountain is typically going to have deeper snows because it's colder. It's not getting that direct sunlight from the southern exposure and melting those off. So, okay. So if you understand the winter influence bedding patterns, that we talked about, the north, south, east, and west, it's going to help you plan for your hunting strategies, predicting elk movements based on those, but also too how to approach the bedding areas. Knowing what the wind is doing, knowing what the weather was doing, and knowing where they're probably bedding at is going to help you, one, figure out an approach route, but also two, you're going to be able to select a really good location for setting up and glassing. Once you have them located, then again, it goes back to planning your approach route into those based on those winds and what direction you're going to have to come in from. So, what you think?
It sounds good.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And it explains, it's just they're almost like people. They don't want to be in the wind either.
They don't like being out in the weather any more than we do.
Right.
But also too, I mean, it's a lot more critical for them. Well, it is for us too. And here's the thing too. We could also use this information because if we're out there in a hunt and we get in a survival situation, a storm comes in or this or that, man, now we know what type of terrain features to look for that are going to help us increase the chance of survival. So I know I know a lot of people that I've got good friends that are rifle hunters. Shoot, those guys are absolutely crazy because they're like, ooh, the more snow and the harsher the weather, the more we love it. I'm like, maybe with me getting a little bit older, I'm becoming more of a fair weather hunter.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I know it's like that muzzleloader cow hunt that Bryce and I had. We'd call each other in the middle of the week. What's the weather forecast? It's going to be 28 and supposed to be about 8 inches of snow. Wind's going to be about 15 to 20. I don't want to deal with that crap. God, I'm glad you said that because I was dreading it also.
Yeah.
But now, and that's what's kind of neat about this new process, diving into this, because I know one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, strategies for rifle hunting or strategies for late season muzzleloader hunts, and I know in past episodes we've focused on the calling aspect of it, but now diving into this, I know with that muzzleloader hunt happening in November. Man, I'm going to be referring back to this. Okay, what are the weather patterns going to do? And as we get to know this new hunt area more and more, it's going to be, oh man, okay, we know exactly where we're going to go. We know, you know, where that pocket is with the thermal cover that's out of the wind, and the lower elevation and where they're going to be. And because I know when we did it last year, we went high. We went high up into the areas that we're normally archery hunting, and there was the only we found some single sets of bull tracks up there in P spots. That was it, up in the snow. As we started coming down the mountain, we started getting into more and more sign. And as we worked across the face, we got over by bear camp, and there probably was a herd of 30, 40 elk that crossed the road sometime that morning while we were up high. And that's one thing Bryce and I was like, God, we should have just came here and sat here. And I'm like, well, yeah, hindsight's always 2020. It's always, oh, this is where we should have been. So, but now knowing this information a little bit, it's kind of thinking those strategies just a little bit different in how we're going to approach those hunts and where about in the mountain we're going to go.
So you were talking about them being out more midday feeding and such. With that, would you say probably you don't want to be in those travel corridors right at light? You want to be there a couple hours after, just so they're more likely to be moving?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of the opposite. We're archery hunting. Our focus is get through those travel corridors and get to areas where they're bedding. Now in wintertime and late season hunts, it's okay, where are they going to be during the middle of the day when the temperatures are the warmest? So quite the opposite. Archery, it's when temperatures are in the warmest, especially early in the season, they're in the darker timber. Well, these late season, it's they're out on southern open ridges, and now mind you too, they're lower elevations, and they're going to be out in those southern, those areas that have that sun exposure, and they're not going to be very far from the tree line either. So they're not going to be very far from their water sources. So that's where really studying your topo maps and really locking in on those areas is going to be a lot more critical. But yeah, down low on the bottom end of long ridges that are especially that are southern facing that have the open, but then they can roll right over the top of that ridge and get that windbreak that we were talking about, but also get the thermal cover from the trees and the branches that are holding some of that heat down a little bit and heat pockets. So, and I know we've made that comment before with riding motorcycle trails. It's you can you can instantly find your cool draws, and again it's that mindset that's a little bit different because earlier in the season we're searching for those cooler pockets, but we don't pay attention to the hot and warm pockets. But that's one thing that kind of has changed my thought a little bit of, okay, now when we're up there this summer setting trail cameras, I'm going to be paying a little bit more attention to these warmer areas. When man, you're riding old road or something and you hit this area that is a cool corner, and then you come around that cool corner and then it's almost like somebody hits you with a hair dryer. It's like, oh man, that heat just sucked it out of you. You can bet your butt I'm actually going to stop and drop a pin right there. I'm going to drop a pin going, okay, this is a place on a late season hunt that I would want to check out because it checks all the boxes. It's southern exposure, it's open, definitely feels a lot hotter than other parts of the mountain, but there's water right here. There's thermal break right here. There is a ridge line that they can get out of the wind on. Check, 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 check. Okay. It's not going to be an area that I'm not going to go to it and hunt that area during September. But man, if I'm there towards the end of November and, maybe it's a year that there's already, you know, 2, 3 feet of snow at that elevation, I know that the higher elevation, the snow has pushed them down, but also too, that 18-inch mark. Okay, if I've got 18 inches or less of snow, I'm going to focus on this area. That's the other thing too. I'm going to look at the mountain and go, okay, what's our snow depth? Where are we at? And that's where if you're in an area that has a snow tell marker, a lot of state agencies will actually list the information of current snow depths at those snow depth markers, at those snow tells. So now all of a sudden you can get that information and go, okay, man, there's 42 inches up top. There's 26 inches mid mountain, and just down 400 feet in elevation from mid mountain, there's 18 inches. I'm going to be focusing on that 18 inches and down. I'm not going to go above the 18 inches because in my mind, a majority of the elk are going to be at that 18 inches of snow depth and down. It's all useless information that we can just store in our head.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, that's it. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
No, I have a comment. I watched one of the hunting shows on Outdoor Channel, Bone Collector, this week, and sure enough, it's right there. They're in Utah hunting elk, and there's this big bull standing right across the meadow, and the big bull does a location bugle, and the guy hits the bugle, his big loud raspy bugle, and throws a big grunt, big chuckle on the end of it, and that bull just walks right on the walls. I'm like, what? You could have sat down and done a few lost cow calls, but no, because he's right there.
You know what's kind of funny? Liz and I have been watching the Destination Elk V7 from Elk 101. They've been trickling new episodes, and it's funny watching these now with her. Now everything that she experienced last year, because kind of the same thing, Jim. We were sitting there, and she's like, "Why is he bugling? Is he not paying it? That bull rips every time he cow calls. Why is he? And I said, because that's their style. I said, these guys are Roosevelt hunters, that they go on that aggressive. I'm going to be aggressive. And she goes, well, I guess I don't want to kill an elk then, because they're not paying attention to what the bull's telling them. And then a little bit later, there's one of them that's moving up, and she goes, drop your pack. Why do you have your pack on? What? Drop your pack. Get in position. Get ready to shoot. And I'm sitting there looking at her and looking at the TV, and I'm like, oh, this is too funny. She's sitting there yelling at them at what they should do and coaching them, and I'm like, oh man, that's entertaining. So, but yeah, same thing, Jim. It's like, and then when the bull comes in, she goes, see. That's why he was timid. He's a younger age class bull, that he's looking for love. He's not looking for a fight. So,
Yeah, it's funny when you know the language, what they're saying, what they're
yeah,
doing. To just go out there and do that because you just, like you said, challenge them at a bar. Arr!
yeah. Well,
Yeah,
it's so many people again go out with a predetermined script in their head of how it's going to go, and they just force that situation. And what's funny is watching these, and it's always the same thing. It's like, man, he was going. Why did he shut up and why did he leave? And you always hear the same thing. I don't know. Must have winded us or seen us moving into position. Because I could have sworn I felt. Meanwhile, they were checking the wind earlier. The bull's over here and the wind's going that way, and they're like, wind had to have swirled. I mean, I could have sworn that I felt it swirl a little bit, but it's not paying attention.
yep,
Okay.
yep.
I am working on Mr. James Nash. I talked to him a couple of days ago via text. He's heading out. He's out this week on a mountain lion hunt, but he's supposed to get a hold of me next week when he gets back. So we'll get him scheduled for a future episode. I did have somebody else reach out about somebody coming on the show, and I said I would put it out to you guys. He is a goat packer. He hunts with goats. And somebody just reached out and said, hey, goats are gaining popularity. Maybe you should have this guy on your show. I didn't say it out loud, but in my head, I was like, I could care less about goats. I have no desire to hunt with goats, but I'll throw it out to the group. And if there's anybody that wants to hear from a goat packer and different possibilities, different hunt styles, you guys tell me. So if any of you guys are watching the replay, if you're interested in that, shoot me an email and I'll schedule a time and have him come on and chit chat about hunting elk with goats. I will say this. Back where I used to hunt when we were 7-8 miles back in, there was a father and son from California that came in that they had about 5-6 goats with them. They said it's great because the goats pack their own food. They help actually pack the elk off the mountain. The elk or those goats just follow them around all day long when they're hunting. And they said that the goats are pretty aware of the surroundings and actually will clue them in when there's an animal around.
Hmm,
And I'm like, hopefully it's not a mountain lion, wolf, or bear.
hmm,
I don't know. I'd like to know when they're around too.
Yeah. It,
hmm.
it's yeah, it makes it a little easier when you know elk are right there. But the only thing is they don't act differently if it's an elk or a deer or I'm sure they would get a little bit more nervous if it's a predator. So, but I'm sure ungulate
So,
they'll act a certain way. So, but anyways, you guys think about it. If you're interested in that, shoot me an email and I'll schedule the time to get them on. So, but well, that is all that I have for tonight. as always, I will upload the recording, and when I send the email out, I will also email a link to that Google Doc, so that way you guys have access to all that stuff. You can actually just, from that link, you can actually, if you have a Google account, you can actually save a copy of that into your your own Google Docs. It'll save it as a copy. That way too, with you saving it as a copy, you can add notes to it, you can expand on it, you can do anything that you want with that document at that point. So,
Cool.
all right, well, Mr. Sandy, hopefully Boise was good to you, and you have a safe trip home tomorrow.
Yeah, it was not bad. Nice and warm here, and uh,
Is it?
you know, it was
We
18 degrees
yeah,
this morning.
we we hit a high of 40 today.
Yeah.
That's not what it was. We were not much warmer than that.
Yeah.
Tucson's
Yeah, and
got
Sandy, you're getting out right in time because the storm starts Friday.
Well, I'll make sure I'm not here for it.
Yeah, yeah. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. I know, I think it's funny because I have to fly out Sunday to Montana for a meeting Monday. And I'm like, really? You guys have been clear and dry
so you come, you take it with you.
and right when I'm coming. And it's not like it's gonna start. No, I'm coming right in the middle of it. So gotta love it.
Uh,
But
yeah.
it's all right. So
Yeah.
all right, guys. Well, as always, keep calling, keep practicing. More importantly, though, have fun, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks on the next Wapiti Wednesday Live Q&A.
All right. See
So,
ya.
thanks, everybody.